Good morning, everybody. I'm here today with Craig Pickering, and he is running in the March state election as an independent candidate for the Legislative Council. So I will let Craig give a brief introduction of himself, and then we will get talking and learn a little bit more about Craig. Hi, Craig.
Good morning, and thank you very much for the time. A quick introduction. I'll try and keep it quick. My career spanned about a dozen different industries, and I actually mean that in that I've worked as a bank manager. I've worked as in manufacturing, national product manager of Panasonic Australia. I've worked in IT and telecommunications, and I've been a university lecturer and a teacher of international students. I studied a bit of law, became a migration agent. So I've worked in, I could list them all, but I won't, a dozen different industries. Until unfortunately was about 53 and I came down with a chronic illness. I don't know if you've heard of it, but MECFS, which is technically myalgic encephalomyelitis and chronic fatigue syndrome and fibromyalgia. Basically, long story short again, I was actually bedridden for 5.5 years, in a wheelchair for a couple of those, and only a couple of years ago got better from that. In between all of that, I lost my parents and lost my wife, all that sort of stuff. Downsized, moved into Glenside development, and then Nick Champion decided that Glenside shouldn't have 8-story buildings; it should have 20. And I know some people who are living in apartments right across the road, very narrow road, where the 20 stories is proposed to go. So I said to myself, I'm privileged in that I've got time. I'm retired now, or forced retirement, but still retired. And I have some experience in marketing and writing and research and that sort of thing. So I thought I'd put my hand up to try and help. It was pretty obvious. I met with the minister several times, and it was pretty obvious from the first meeting that he was going to approve it no matter what. Whether that was his opinion at the time, I honestly don't know for sure, but that was my opinion. And lo and behold, we put forward all the arguments, all the facts, all the figures that said nobody wants this and it's going to cause chaos in all these different areas and it shouldn't go ahead. And of course, he signed off and said, yes, it should. And during that campaign, I was contacted by a couple of other local groups who had heard me, and one's from McGill and Campbelltown or Dinga saying, hey, this is happening to us as well. We're not being listened to, we're not being heard. So I created a body called Community Development Advocacy South Australia in order to bring together these local voices so they'd be more powerful, they'd be heard instead of just ignored, which is what the government has been doing and is still doing. Basically, if anybody disagrees with what the government wants to do, no matter where it is, they'll just label that group as a noisy minority and say they're climate activists or tree huggers or NIMBYs or whatever their favourite term of the day is, and dismiss them as irrelevant. And I think the Mayor of Prospect came out recently and said, well, less than 1% of people responded to our community consultation about this development we're going to have. So therefore, the less than 1% don't matter. They're irrelevant. And my response to that is that less than 1% of people in this state are members of the Labor Party. So does that mean that the state government is irrelevant as well? Because they're a vocal minority. So these people just don't seem to see the big picture and they don't seem to look past the next election. And that has always been the case. And I've always been critical of politics because of that. And so late last year, it's only been a couple of months since I made the decision to run for Legislative Council. Some people mentioned that I should in order to raise awareness of the lack of community consultation in all areas around Adelaide. And I'm talking about the Festival Plaza, North Adelaide Golf Course, the raising of building height limits in the city. And there are numerous developments happening that the government's just gone, tick, yes, we're going to do this. and haven't consulted anybody, or said they did but didn't really listen. So nobody's being listened to. I've always had the goal of respectful negotiation, which is no matter who you speak to, you respect their point of view. And that's where I'm coming from. And that's why I'm running, because I don't want to look back and say I should have tried, or I'm not one of these people who always complains but actually never does something about it. So this is for me to raise awareness and also to have no regrets. That was a very short introduction, wasn't
Um, I saw on your socials that you were talking about the ballot paper changes. Did you want to just
it?
explain perhaps a bit more about that
Yes,
for people?
definitely. Thank you. Because it's not widely known. I did put out a press release earlier this week, which wasn't picked up by anybody, but it's Writers' Week's scenario, so I understand that. It's far more important than little old me. Um, but in the legislative reforms, well, they call them reforms, that the government rushed through within 2.5 hours about July last year, through both houses, was that's around things around limiting donations and that sort of thing. But what they also didn't tell anybody, and I actually had a meeting with a current member of the Legislative Council who's going for re-election in March, and they weren't even aware of this, even though they voted on the legislation. So that's a concern. But they weren't aware that you used to be able to have 3 words after the little box at the top of the ballot paper. So, for example, the most famous example, Nick Xenophon had no pokies. And I could have, I was going to have something like empowering community voices. So at least, I mean, nobody knows who I am, to be perfectly honest. I have the zero profile. So if somebody goes into the ballot box and they look at all the major parties and they go, no, I'm pissed off with them. I want a protest vote, or I just want to vote for something different or an independent. They'd be able to look across the top of the ballot paper and see empowering community voices. And if those words resonated, they could put a number in the box. The government has outlawed those 3 words. So I can only have the word independent, or I can choose to have nothing at all. And why I would choose to have nothing at all, I have no idea. But that's it. So you still got Australian Labor Party, Liberal Party, Greens, and those sorts of things. But if you're not a party, you can only have the word independent. So they've taken away any description of what I stand for. And that is purely because they are afraid of the independent vote, which has been growing. Their own primary vote has been declining over the last 20 years. They're slowly bleeding. They'll say that they've got huge mandates, and that if you look at government numbers now, you'd say Labor's the most popular government in Australia, but they're not really. They're there because of preference voting. So their primary vote is still decreasing. And unfortunately, this government and other governments have chosen the easy way out. Instead of trying to re-engage with the public and find out why are people not voting for us anymore, perhaps we should listen to them. Perhaps we should actually get their points of view and actually respect what they say. So instead of doing that, they just simply say, well, we'll just change the rules so nobody will know what they stand for, so nobody will vote for them.
Mm.
And that's what they've done. It's killing democracy. It's stabbing democracy in the back, in my opinion. Nobody knows about it. Nobody, I'll be pushing that barrow for between now and the election, but I think that is one of the most obvious and critical restrictions they've placed on our democracy that has happened for a long, long time.
Mm.
And even the new legislation that they passed in July is still not available online. So, as an independent candidate, I still don't know what rules I have to follow for this coming election. Now, there's only 2 reasons for that happening. One is complete stupidity, which I don't believe. And the other one is because they want to hide it and they want to keep it hidden until the very last minute to make it as difficult as possible. So again, everybody who voted on this legislation has, I would hope, read it, so they know what's going on. But anybody outside of that political sphere does not know. And I've spoken to the Electoral Commission and they say, oh, yes, we'll put it out there as soon as we can. Well, that's the press of a button. I'll upload documents to my website within a minute. So what's stopping them from doing that? It can only be because they've been told not to, or they haven't been given approval to do that. And I think that manipulation of our democracy is absolutely disgusting.
So that would only be one of the things that is
Mm.
kind of going against the independence because, we had the core flutes. So being able to put core
Mm.
flutes up on a pole somewhere,
Yeah.
it's all right for the major parties because they have funding, they have advertising, they're promoting themselves everywhere. We have existing members at the moment on I think on our dollar, who are
Yeah.
out campaigning with their new candidates, and nobody's saying anything about that. So independents are a disadvantage there. Then you have the donation ban. Well, that's all good when you're cashed up. And we've got independents coming in and they can't seek large donations. And it appears that the voice it is just being tightened and tightened so that the people out in the community have little opportunity of getting into parliament and making a difference. And then we see the narrative being controlled and we're seeing people suffering more and more.
Absolutely, totally agree. The major candidates from major parties are getting $100,000 basically thrown at them. And if I applied, I would get $5,000, which doesn't cover the nomination fee for myself and my running mate, which is I have to pay the government $6,000 for that.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, I'm allowed to spend up to $100,000 as any candidate is allowed to. I don't have $100,000 to do that, and I don't expect 20 odd people to give me $4,000 to get there anyway. If somebody donates $100 to my campaign, I am extremely overwhelmed. Um, but they can hold dinner parties and give access to ministers or prospective ministers and charge thousands of dollars, and big business will come along and pay that. I can't do that.
I don't think the community is aware. Like the community only see the advertising and the campaigning in the media and on social media, and they can be forgiven for believing that that's really what's happening here and they don't know what's going on behind the surface. So I always say to people, head out, find out who are your local candidates, who's
Mm.
running, and go and speak to them. Don't believe what you see on social media because anyone can pay for advertising. And then also go and have a look and see who's running for the Legislative Council because I've seen how people can work together in the Legislative Council
Mm.
and get good outcomes for the community. But it's having the right balance in there and the right people. So
Mm.
if you're elected, what would be one of the, I guess, a priority? What would be one of the first things that you'd like to get stuck into?
The first thing, well, the main reason I decided to run in the first place is that the public engagement charter for major developments is being reviewed this year. It's undergoing a major review. After the Glenside fiasco, I'll call it that, I met with the chair of this Australian Planning Commission and I presented my arguments to him. And after that, to his credit, he asked me to write a review of the public engagement charter using Glenside as a case study. Over the next 4 to 5 weeks, I did that, and that report's now gone throughout the Planning Commission, SCAP, ICAC even asked for a copy, Department of Housing and Urban Development have all got copies, and I keep finding people who have read it who I've never heard of. So that's gone through the system, and I have been told that I will be involved, excuse me, in discussions around that review this year. But I want to make sure that I'm involved, and the only way to do that is to be elected to Legislative Council, and because then I've got a title
Yeah.
and that title somehow makes me more important. So I can then say, I want to be involved in this review, please. and I've got a far better chance of making changes. And I made about 14 recommendations in my report. And just to give an example, one of those is that people be given more than 6 weeks to look at the documentation and to provide a submission. Because to put together a proposal, a developer has a year, 18 months, even 6 months, full-time employees. They produce hundreds, sometimes thousands of documents, and it's all technical stuff that people don't understand. Most people would look at it and go, I've got no idea. They'll look at the pretty picture, the architectural drawing and go, yeah, that looks nice, and not do anything. So at the moment, we're only given 6 weeks to try and read hundreds, thousands of pages, go to someone and say, can you please explain these technical things to me? Understand it all, disseminate it all, think about what we want to do as a submission, maybe find some other people who think the same and maybe say, hey, this isn't good enough and protest against it, and then put in a written submission each. And we've got lives, we've got jobs, we've got families, we've got sometimes two, three jobs to pay the mortgage and the rent these days, which is unbelievable. And yet we're expected to do that within 6 weeks. And I've written to the minister, I've written to the department and said, look, can you really expect someone to to properly respond within 6 weeks? And they quite correctly came back and said, well, that's in the legislation. So my first thing is to at least double that to 12 weeks. Because, and also to provide the services free of charge to people to actually go to someone and say, hey, you're an architect or you're a planner, you're a town planner. Can you please explain to me what's going on? Because that's the only way you can get real meaningful public consultation.
So
And
is
the,
that something then that you would advocate for in there, in the Legislative Council? Is that it's the lived experience voices, the groups, the people wanting to make submissions, because I see similar behaviour. I mean, anyone could be forgiven for assuming that it's a government trying to control the narrative, because we see that whether it's in child protection and health and disability, um, we have inquiries and select committees, and we look at a vulnerable group, foster and kinship carers, who are 24/7, look not just looking after the high needs kids, but managing department staff, NGO staff, treating
yeah.
professionals, and then an inquiry will come up, and it always lands just before Christmas or just before school holidays, and they go, well, here you go, you've got a couple of weeks or a few weeks, get your submissions in, and then they wonder why there's only 30, 40 submissions, or and it's totally unfair. So it's not just in the social service side of things then. You're also seeing it in the planning side. It seems like habitual practice, doesn't it?
It does, and it's completely disrespectful. It's the same as whenever members of parliament or politicians are invited to public rallies where they know they're going to get a bad reception, so they just don't turn up. To me, that com- goes completely against what they were elected to do, which is to listen to the people. So if I get invited to a rally or to a group of people who absolutely detest what I say, I'm still going to go along and listen to them because they are people, they deserve to have their own opinion. And what I want to do is find out why they have that opinion. I don't want to go there to talk at them or argue that they shouldn't have that opinion. I want to find out why do you believe that way? Because then you can come to some common understanding, some common ground. And no, I'm not going to be able to do everything that they want me to do, but there might be something that we agree on that can be done. And at least that's a start. And then maybe a year later I can do something else. And then that group of people who are so anti-government, anti-everything can look back and say, well, actually, if we actually talk to people and respect what they say, we can actually get things done. And that's just not happening. And that is the cornerstone of why I'm standing. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I've had a few conversations with people out in the community, and they talk about the promises that they uh, see thrown up on social media and in the news. We're going to promise this new building and promise this money for this area, and people are saying the same thing. They're sick of seeing the advertising, and they're sick of sending off emails to members of parliament or government, not getting a response, not being, there's no genuine consultation, and people want to be heard because it's the people that are suffering. They can bring forward. There are so many people that would have solutions
Hmm.
which would, save time, save taxpayer money, because it's not government's money, it's our money. If anyone's out there working or paying taxes, it's their money. So people
Hmm.
do want to be heard, and I think people are starting to wake up and realize that their voices aren't being heard. So
Yeah.
it sounds good, and it would be good to have more members of parliament in there who are wanting to engage with the community. Um, so
Yes, it's being listened to, but it's being politicians will listen to, and I know that a group of people who are opposing the Festival Plaza building, the 38 stories, and I don't oppose the building, but I certainly oppose where it's going to go, because that's community space. It's not 38-story building space, and it shouldn't be leased to an interstate developer for $1 a year, for goodness sake. I mean, who amongst us would love to pay $1 a year rent? Um,
I would
it's
love a building in the
uh,
city for a
yeah,
dollar.
it's just ridiculous. It's giving away money, which is our money, as you said.
Yeah.
And two of the things that I won't make any promises because political promises, nah, they don't work. Um, I've always lived by the fact that if I do make a promise or a commitment to do something, I'll think about it first and think about, do I have control over that? And if I do, then I can make a promise. But if you just make these generic promises, they're not worth anything. But one of the things that I will always do and have always done, even in business, is before I spend $1, whether it's for a coffee or a $50 million golf course upgrade, the first question I ask myself is, if this was my money out of my pocket, would I do it?
Mhm.
Politicians at the moment, I think, is my opinion, their first thought is, if this goes onto the front page of a newspaper or an online paper, will I get away with it?
Yeah.
That's that's what they think. What they should be thinking is, every single time they make a decision about money, no matter what it is, if this was mine out of my pocket, would I spend it? And I think a lot of people in that position would say, well, no. And one of the other things that I don't think any other candidate has ever done, and I haven't heard of them doing this, so I'm open to be corrected, but when you make a certain quota of votes for the Legislative Council, and if I'm lucky to get that quota, that'd be wonderful. You get money given to you, a few dollars per vote. My initial reaction is that, again, there with that question in my mind, is that's taxpayer dollars. That's not my money. That's taxpayer money. So once I achieve that quota and I receive that money from the Electoral Commission, after I pay myself back, because this is my money going into this campaign, I will repay every single donation I receive. And that's a commitment I've already made public on public radio. I had a meeting a couple of nights ago with some of my supporters, and I made that commitment again. And because I've done the sums, there's enough money for me to pay that back. And why do political candidates get to keep that money, and what for? Because if I'm lucky to be enough to be elected, I haven't looked it up, honestly, but I get a very well paid job.
Mhm.
So why am I getting this bonus? Because people, out of the kindness of their hearts, decided to vote for me. To me, it doesn't make sense. So that money will go back and to repay every donor. And the other reason for doing that is because if somebody rings me up, if I get elected, and says, "Hey, Craig, remember that $4,000 I donated? I'd like to come and talk to you about this issue." I can respond with, "Well, actually, mate, I paid you back, so buzz off. You can go back into the queue."
Yeah.
Um, Whereas politicians at the moment can't do that. they get lobbied by big business and companies that give a lot of money through lots of different channels to overcome the $5,000 limit. And they all know that they do it, but they'll say they don't. And so they owe a debt to these people. If elected, I won't have that debt.
Yep. And it's not even just with politicians. I hear that so often around, you know, we have to protect our funding. We can't speak up and say because, we might not get the money or we need this, so we can't upset this person. So whether it's in Parliament or in departments and NGOs, there are so many people worrying about protecting their next dollar, their next funding, and the
Yeah.
people giving it relying on, well, we gave you the buck, so now you owe us, now you protect us. And that's why I believe we need independent voices. And I do know people who are within parties who do still retain that value as well. But it is also obviously really hard when you are in a party. But it's
Yes.
that independent voice and yeah, being able to say, you can't buy me, you can't buy my
Mm.
vote for your project.
Mm.
If someone's doing something wrong, you can't buy my silence.
Mm.
That's something that we need all of our members of parliament to stand by, I think.
Transparency
Yep.
is the word, and we don't have any of that really at the moment. Regarding the golf course, they may have released a fancy video, AI generated probably, but we're not told exactly where the trees are going to be demolished and exactly how many. And the number they've put forward is, I think, 585, but is that the end of it or is that the beginning? They said there'll be no permanent fencing, but there has to be a driving range to hold an international tournament. There has to be one. And by law, you have to have netting, permanent netting around the driving range to protect the public. So there will be permanent fencing. So, but that's not technically on the golf course. So they've come out and said, oh, on the golf course, there'll be no fencing. But there will be fencing, it just won't be at the golf course. And it's picking and choosing bits of truth like that and getting away with it because at the moment, both parties are, well, they've hired all the good reporters, the good investigative reporters onto their own team for lots of money. And I don't blame those reporters for accepting those jobs at all. But what we're left is with cutbacks and everything in media, are very few investigative reporters who are willing to put out investigative pieces. And so unfortunately, they're getting away with it. One specific question no one has ever asked Minister Nick Champion, who always goes on about the housing crisis, and so he should because it's incredibly important. But no one has ever asked him how many properties over the last 2 years have been sold as affordable housing.
Mhm.
How many have been listed on the government's website as being available, and how many of those have actually been sold? He'll talk about, oh, 15% of this development is affordable housing, 20% of that, or whatever it might be, or this includes affordable housing. But I even put through an FYI and was told this is confidential information, we can't tell you. Well, how can a number be confidential information? I'm just after a number. I don't want the names and addresses of people who bought these properties. I just want to know, is it 100, 1,000, 10,000? How many? Um, but no one has actually asked that question. They've just accepted the fact that, oh, it's good. We now got 20% affordable housing and new developments. But how many have actually been sold as affordable?
So is that something that in getting into Parliament that you would find really important and something you would advocate against is withholding like government reports, information. We see members of government heading off overseas on projects, and then they come back, and other members of parliament will ask them and say, "Okay, so what did you get out of that? What did you see? Where's the info?" And then they go, "Yeah, no, we're not releasing it."
Yeah.
Now that's the Mulligan report will always be a bugbear for myself and lots of other people in South Australia, I think. But I believe anything the taxpayer's paying for should be released. And the only things that should be withheld is that third party information, the identifying information of people, individual people, and that the crux of the information itself, it should be released to us because we paid for it and we paid those people to go and seek it and bring it back to our state.
Exactly. And that comes back to the question that every politician should ask themselves is, if this was my money, would I spend it? Now, in that case, the question is, would I pay for an overseas airfare, accommodation, all those travel expenses, meals, and so on? The time it took for my staff to write up this report, produce the report, print the report, and then not make it public. If that was my money, would I spend it? And the answer is obviously no, because not getting anything out of it at all. It's a report that's going to sit on a shelf and maybe three people will read. So completely agree with you. Those reports, there might be some confidential information in there, but that can easily be redacted. And don't release reports with page after page after page of just black. So it's all been redacted. Yeah, that's just rude.
Yeah.
But every report should be released because it's been paid for by you and I.
Mhm.
I have been paying tax all my life. Everybody has. And the fact that something like a third of the largest companies in Australia pay less tax than a doctor or a nurse. Yeah, it comes down to priorities. And to me, it's always been about priorities. We will spend $50 million on a golf course to attract a big event. Why are we giving that $50 million to the homeless? Because that's still a huge issue.
Mm.
Domestic violence is still a huge issue. Children going hungry. We have that in our state right in front of our faces, and yet we're choosing when our elected leaders, so-called leaders, are choosing to spend that money on golf courses, 38-story buildings where they could be charging millions of dollars in rent but only charging $1. I mean, that money could go to charity as well. Um, and they're putting homelessness, hungry, the housing crisis right down the bottom. Cost of living issues, no, that's not important. We want to build golf courses. We want to
And
build 38-story buildings.
and I understand that we improve stadiums, they want to build a golf course. They want to do all these things because they say it generates income for the state, it generates income for our people. But we never see a roll-on effect, like you say. Where does all that money go? Because we keep pouring money into child protection, we keep pouring money into health, all those social areas, but nothing's getting better. So we're not seeing anything. We're not seeing goods for the money, and we're not seeing improvement in services. We keep repeating the same things over and over again and still wondering why nothing's being fixed. And then there's no accountability. And then there's no independent oversight of departments. So it just seems to be
Mm.
this revolving cycle of BS and we
Yeah.
just can't get off because nobody's willing to break the cycle and do things differently. And I've been to
Yeah.
so many community reform meetings and forums and things, and there are amazing solutions being proposed by people in
Mm.
community. Things that would save money, get better outcomes for people, save lives. But no one's willing to get off the cycle
Yeah.
and do something differently.
There are a lot of clever people out there with clever ideas. There are a lot of unintelligent people out there with great ideas as well.
Yeah.
Um, and they're not being heard, not being listened to, and so on. And what you've described is trickle-down economics, which was promoted probably back in the 70s by Keating, and that's the reason why they gave the rich lovely tax cuts. Because if you give them tax cuts, the money will trickle down. They'll make more money in their businesses, so they'll pay better wages. Over the last 50 years, we have learned that that does not work. In fact, the world has got far worse. In the last 5 years alone, the number of billionaires worldwide has grown by 50%. And that's during the COVID
Yeah.
pandemic. So a lot of people made a lot of money out of that pandemic. And yeah, 50% more billionaires. It would only cost, the World Bank has said, it only cost 40 billion a year for 5 years. So $200 billion over 5 years to cure world hunger. Now, you look at someone like Elon Musk, and he's looking at $1 trillion payout or something in about 10 years' time. And he's already worth hundreds of billions of dollars. Someone like that could fund the first year and not know it.
Yeah.
And you can line up the billionaires and the major companies and get them to pay that, and we wouldn't have hunger. I mean, again, it comes down to priorities and this notion of trickle-down economics. Like, for example, the 38-story tower in the Festival Plaza, the Minister for Planning, Nick Chambier, and I think came out and said this one building will bring in $1 billion a year to our economy. Um, First of all, what planet is he on? And that a building can do that, because if it did, why are you building 10 of them? And secondly, you're leasing it for $1 a year. So that's going to make you $1 billion over what, a billion years? Um, it makes no sense. And it's another example of, if we make money for the rich people or the big end of town, it'll trickle down and everybody will benefit. And that does not work. It doesn't happen. The people at the bottom, and we've seen charities close just this week
Yeah.
because of it, they don't get enough funding. So if charities that look after homeless and hungry people are not getting enough money, and this trickle-down economics thing has been going for 50 years, it hasn't worked. Light bulb moment.
Yeah.
It hasn't worked. Let's try something else.
Mm. But it's there's a lot of rich people supporting government, and not necessarily in money, but in those decisions and backing decisions, supporting projects. And I think that's the problem, because poor old people, maybe living out north or down south, battling day to day,
Yeah.
aren't seen as being a risk to a government, are they? Because they don't have money behind them. Money brings power. It helps empower a voice. People listen to you if you walk in a room and you're worth millions of dollars, because they all seem to want their support. And I think that's the problem, is that the voices of everyday people are being suppressed, and we have so many wealthy people rallying around government and major parties, and supporting and continually propping them up within their community. And it's like that old saying of the rich get richer and the poor get poorer, but it's not even just money wise. It's that voice wise and that having a say. It's that disconnect seems to be growing, because the power is growing and it's silencing everybody else. That's what we need to change.
Yeah, exactly. The gap between rich and poor has never been wider, and is still expanding. And yeah, the fact that our governments, I'd say governments plural, are allowing that to happen under their watch, and that's what they know is happening. The housing crisis is a perfect example. They're listening, they're focusing on supply. They keep making announcements about, oh, we've just released land, it's going to produce 10,000 homes. What they don't say is that's 10,000 over 10 years. But we're releasing all this land, we're building 20-story apartment buildings. That's going to help everything. But building 20-story apartment building here in Glenside full of $1 million apartments is not going to help the affordable housing issue at all. Oh, yes, it will, because rich people will move into those, so they have to sell their homes. Yeah, great. Their homes are worth over $1 million as well, That's, so they're concentrating on supply and economics 101, and the fact that no one in politics seems to understand this is very concerning. Economics 101 says that price is driven by supply and demand. They're the two things. People have written books about just demand. And I'm not saying slash immigration or increase the birth rate by 20% or whatever. What I'm saying is they have to be looked at together because by the government's own numbers, we're going to grow by another 670,000 people over the next 25 years. Now, if we keep building homes, even at the so-called massive rate that we are now, which is not keeping up with demand, that's going to make the housing crisis a lot worse in 25 years. It's not going to help at all. So we have to look at the demand side. And the immediate reaction is, oh, but if we cut immigration or if we cut population growth, our GDP will suffer and it will become negative. And it's been shown that if our population doesn't grow, our GDP will be negative. So therefore, we have an underlying problem that our economy is not working because if we keep bringing people in, so the government can say, yes, we're growing by 1 or 2% a year, Aren't we really good at achieving that? Where are those people going to live? Where are they going to work? We're told we've got this huge shortage of construction workers, building industry workers. Okay, bring them all in, but where are they going to live? And the government's own document, which is they brought out about 18 months ago, it's a housing essay, big flashy thing, which is over 100 pages. On pages 1 and 3, you've got the Premier and you've got the Minister of Planning and saying we're doing all these wonderful things to solve the housing crisis. So on page about 49, if you actually are silly enough like me to read the report, it actually said, the department actually says that the cause of the housing crisis is because of inaction by government over the last 20 years, because of lack of infrastructure predominantly. So there's a report where you've got a smiling Premier and a smiling Minister saying, look what we've done, isn't it brilliant? When over the last 20 years, 16 of those have been Labor governments. And their own report from their own department says that your governments have actually caused this crisis. And that's also a national reason. Let's bring in all these people, make the economy grow, but we won't think about where they're going to live, how they're going to catch a bus to work, where they're going to work. All those questions are just not answered. And the recent example of Mount Gambier being promised $200 million is just another political promise. And where was that money 20, 30 years ago? They should have done the infrastructure before they built the properties, not 20 years after. And I've got a friend who lives in Flagstaff Hill, and she is still not connected to the SA sewage system. So she's still not connected to the city sewage system. Her house has been there for 50 years, and she's in Flagstaff Hill. So let us look after our people first before we bring in people. And the skills shortage list, um, the list that says these are all the occupations that we're short of and we need people in, has things like architects, marketing executives, hairdressers. Uh, I'm sorry, but I don't think we have a shortage of those people. But
Mm.
they're there because there are training institutions in Australia, very large ones, that provide courses on those things and rely on international students to come and do those courses. We don't need those people. We need people in the construction industry. So that list has over 600 occupations on it.
Do
We are
you
not
think
short of
you
600
think
occupations.
that is it not time to have a look at we have kids going through year 12 every year, and why aren't they having a look at why are so many kids leaving school, completing year 12, and we can't fill the positions that we have here? And, I have people contacting me who are social workers, applying for jobs in child protection, getting knocked back all the time. Now, either all of these people have passed through university and become qualified social workers but useless, which then makes it look like our social work training is
Mhm.
not good enough, or is there a problem with the hiring? And then if you look at other occupations, compared to years ago, there is so much regulation and red tape. Do we need to start perhaps? I always say we keep throwing band-aids on broken departments and stuff processes
Hmm.
instead of actually picking something and stripping it back bare to basics and going, okay, we've built all these band-aids for 10 and 10, 20 years and we're up here. Let's strip all this away and now let's have a look because we have people giving lived experience, regardless of what industry. And let's start at basics, and we can probably remove a lot of the red tape and the hurdles and even
Hmm.
the costs. And we have kids coming out of high school trying to get into university courses, and they're battling the people from overseas to get the places. So we're not
Yeah.
looking, I don't think that we're looking at the guts of the problem. And that's where we need to start and go, how come we are not producing young people coming out of high school who are moving into TAFE or university or even straight into jobs that they want to do? I mean, even to go somewhere now and make coffee, they have to go and do a course.
Mm.
I did that as a teenager, and I mean, gosh, I did it for nearly 30 years in one of my jobs. I didn't need to go and do a certificate to learn how to make coffee.
Mm.
Everything is so overregulated. So is that not something that needs to be looked at?
Um, I think, Lisa, you've made the key mistake of using common sense.
Yeah,
Uh,
if only
um,
we could bottle that and sell that.
yeah, not many decisions made by. I hesitate to use the word leaders because to me, a leader is something you earn, not something you get by having a title put on you. But those people in power are just not using common sense, or they're being so heavily influenced by one side that they are completely blinded to the other side of the equation. Um, and that's by design, and that's what a lobbyist is meant to do, is meant to blindside them like that, and they're being allowed for that to happen. There are so many examples, such as what you've just mentioned, of ways that we can actually make a difference and try and actually get better at things. And it doesn't have to involve building big buildings or golf courses or stadiums or whatever. It has to go to talking to the people on the ground who are facing these issues and talking to them and saying, what are your major obstacles? How can we help? And I know it's a cute line that I'm from the government and I'm here to help, but that is something that I would very much like to do if I'm lucky enough to get elected. Yes, I'll be only one voice. Yes, I'll be in the upper house, and I'll have to grit my teeth and see a lot of legislation go through backed by major parties that I don't like. But my
Yeah.
goal is to, by osmosis, if necessary, just talk to the others, educate them all on the fact that, hey, take the blinkers off, take those party restrictions off, because as you said before, people are voting along party lines when they just don't want to. I know that the Minister for Climate had to vote in favour of the North Adelaide Golf Course and the demolition of hundreds of trees, which she is completely against personally. So why don't we have the right for these people to vote the way they want to vote?
We saw that
Um,
with the child protection bill, the flawed child protection bill. And,
exactly.
you know, in the Ledge Co, they all voted for it. I met with several of them after. They all admitted to me that they hadn't read it and they had no choice. They had to vote. Now, I don't care what party you run for or who you stand for. If I vote for you, you work for me. You don't work for the party. You work for me. You work for my neighbours and my other people in the community, and you vote for what is best for us. It's not a herd mentality and look after my friends. I don't want people to be friends because they're in a political party.
Mm.
Yes, you're going to have respect for relationships, but you're there working for our community and our community's suffering. So if enough
Yeah.
people vote differently and that voting power is reduced, especially in the LegCo, the people have the power to change what is being passed through government. And all of that starts with their voting, doesn't it?
It,
Quite
it it
differently.
does. It does. It's not rocket science. It's not complicated. People will try and make it complicated by saying, "Oh, that's impossible," or "That'll take years," or whatever. So be it if it takes years. Let's at least start the ball rolling in the right direction instead of making the same mistakes all the time. And yeah, that's why I'm standing.
Sounds good, Craig. Alrighty. So I'm going to post this video up on YouTube. You'll share it, I'll share it. I will put your contacts in the description on the video. So, is there what can people do to support you if they like what they're hearing? What do you need from people?
What I need is for them to contact me through the website, tell me what they want to hear from me. If they've got any questions at all, I'm happy to answer questions on any issue. Um, again, as I said before, I have a zero profile. Nobody knows me. So if you believe in what I say and you think I might actually be a good person to have in the Legislative Council, please share that with people. It's very easy to just share my Facebook posts or send an email to your contact list saying, hey, if you're disenchanted with the major party entities, you might be interested in this guy. Here's a link. That would be absolutely fantastic because as one person team, I can't physically get out and visit 1.3 million voters. It's just not possible. I'd love to, but it's just not possible. So I'm relying on other people to spread the word for me, especially now when you're going to have to look at the ballot paper and the top, first of all, find the word independent and then look below that to find Pickering Craig. So it's going to be hard to vote for me, but hopefully a lot of people would just take those extra 3 seconds, look at the ballot paper, make a conscious decision and not just follow party lines. There's no handout for how to vote card for legislative councils, so you won't be accosted by me or any of my followers at a polling booth. It's your choice, your decision. Do you really want to keep going down the same path of a worsening housing crisis, larger gap between rich and poor, homeless being ignored, domestic violence, kids under pressure, all those sorts of things? I'm not promising to fix all of those, but I'm promising them to bring attention to them, to listen to the solutions put forward by the people who know best, and spread that message through Parliament.
Wonderful. It's been really nice talking to you, Craig.
You
And
too, Lisa.
I'm
Thank
sure we
you.
will talk again, and especially should you be elected.
Absolutely.
See
Thank
me in
you.
there.
Fingers crossed.
Thanks, Craig.
Right.
Bye.